Hi, I'm Pastor Bob. This is my friend Gio.
Hey, everybody.
This is a conversation called The Messy Disciples. These are Zoom conversations that we thought would be fun to post and get people to interact with about life, about God, about how to follow Jesus. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
I'm definitely not fighting it. I need to see. So, I've been digging into this book. I think you and I had talked about this book in the past. It's called The Year of Living Biblically. I forget the author's name. You probably know it.
I think it's J.J. Adams.
Yeah, J.J. Adams. And it was recommended to me, I believe, by you and by a handful of other people who just have, always said that it's a real interesting take because it's about a guy who tries to go through the Bible and live by the Bible and live as close to the word of the Bible, in such places where he caveats, in such places where euphemism is not abundantly clear, right? That's
yes.
What at some point he makes a comment to the such. But, just the opening 12 minutes of that chapter for anybody who hasn't read it or better yet, listen to it. It's actually better to listen to the Audible book because the author reads it himself and he's a character. The guy is a Jew that said he said he's about as, what did he say? He goes, I'm about as Jewish as
Olive Garden is Italian.
That's what it was. His Olive Garden is Italian. Great memory, Pastor Bob.
Well, I'm Italian.
I know.
So it made a lot of sense to me.
So am I, and I missed it. Excuse me. That probably blew out the speakers. But just in the first 12 minutes of this book, he lists off this basically the book is his journal essentially of him trying to do things like put tassels on your clothes because the Bible says to do it, to not wear clothes that have mixed fibers like linen and wool, and that some of these things in the Bible are explained and others of these things are not explained, and it's just because you have to do it. And he gives a great example. He spoke to his rabbi and he said, why is it like this? Why are so many of these things not, explained? And he said, well, think of it like this. He said, it would be the same thing as your parents or you telling your kids not to touch the oven or the stove top because it's hot. Well, you don't know it's hot and you'll get burned, and you don't understand why because you don't understand an oven or a stove. But you got to do it, and you just got to shut up and do it because that's what God says to do. And I thought that was, for me, really hit home. And so some of these things, it was real interesting, and I would love for you to dig in a little bit here. And I know you probably know this text inside and out, but some of these things that are in the Bible, what kinds of these things could we be doing right now to help navigate these difficult times, to give us some solace or some direction or some way to digest what is about, at the point of the video that we're making on August 12th right now, 2020, about to get a lot crazier as we go into an election and you're seeing more riots and more shootings and more this and all this, chatter that makes it so difficult, as we've talked about in other videos, to hear God and hear God's word. And you've suggested that, it's in the word that we need to be. And so this book really hit home when the whole book is about being in the word for a whole year every day. There.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. It's a really good setup. What I think is really profound about the book is that he, seeing his son and knowing that his son needs to have a moral compass, decides to dig into his past and say, well, I'm a Jew, though I'm not I'm an agnostic, and he's very honest about that. But I think it's interesting as he says, but I don't want my son to grow up like that. And so he takes the Bible and he decides to do what he's done in other things. He's written other books, like he wrote a book about always being honest about everything. He wrote a book called A Month of Living Outsourced, where he outsourced his entire life, like his job, his phone calls with his wife, reading his kids.
Oh, that's cool.
Bed. Yeah, so that's kind of his joie de vivre. He's a journalist who lives in Manhattan, and he works for Esquire, I think it is. And he's just got these crazy ideas that he goes headlong into. And so when he saw this kind of conflict happening inside of himself, he said, well, then, I'm going to try and live the Bible. And I'm not, and I'm going to live the 10 Commandments, love your neighbor as yourself, things like that. dietary laws. But he says, but I'm also going to live all of the other crazy stuff too, because what he explores in the first chapter is this idea of fundamentalism. And in the rest of the book, he interviews a whole bunch of other people who claim to be fundamentalists about the Bible. Fundamentalist to him meaning I follow every piece of it. And what his critique is of the other people later on in the book, which we won't get into, is that they call themselves fundamentalists, but they're not. And so he's trying to like out fundamentalist the fundamentalists. But I think what he found is really beautiful. What he found is that it is impossible to live every single rule of the Bible. And that was a takeaway he had. But also at the same time, I think one of the things that he missed is that all of those rules were set up in the Bible to show us that we're sinners and we need Jesus. So all of that law exists not to necessarily make us better people. It was to make us a distinct people who were distinctly and keenly aware that we were in great need of a mercy outside of us. And so he completely lost that. He treated there's a couple of hilarious moments, like when in the Old Testament it says that you're not allowed to sit in the same seat as a woman who's menstruating.
Yep.
Yeah, and you read that part.
Yep, I read that part.
And so his wife got really mad at that because she saw it was very sexist, and so she sat in every seat in the house.
Seat in the house, yeah.
And so he had to buy this stool that he would just walk around with this stool. And it's really great. As a journalist, he's taken all these photos of himself with like this crazy beard and like wearing an Old Testament robe. And there was one part where it says in the Old Testament, for instance, that you have to stone an adulterer to death.
And he brought the pebbles.
Remember? And he kept the stones.
That situation was so crazy. And that was one of the situations, maybe you can talk about it, that really, I think, is very similar to people going off when they're not wearing their masks, right? You're seeing all this crap. That's what I was thinking about. So maybe you could tell it a little bit.
So
wow.
So in his endeavor to live the Bible literally, one of the rules of the Bible is that you're supposed to stone adulterers, specifically adulterous males. And so he's at the park, and he anticipating that he may need to do this, he carries around these little rocks in his pocket, right? Which is kind of creepy when you think about it. But, he's trying to be a fundamentalist. And so he's talking with this guy at the park, and this guy confesses. He says, well, I'm an adulterer. Are you going to stay? And he jokes around with the guy saying, well, if you wouldn't mind, I'd really like to have the opportunity. Well, the guy gets mad, and he takes all of his rocks and starts throwing it back at him.
Because he was an adulterer. Do you remember?
Yes, because he was an adulterer.
He was an adulterer.
Yeah. He
admitted it.
It was really wild. And I think what it teaches is something really powerful, which is rules, when you follow them in that kind of way, may prove you're right, but you still may be dead wrong.
Right.
And here's where I think Jesus does a better job, because Jesus lived biblically all the time. That's what he was. There's a difference between the spirit and the letter of the law, right? The stoning adulterers was put in the Bible not because God is like, yes, kill them all, but he does it because we have hard hearts, and it's the threat that should deter us from actually doing it. It's like when you say to your kids, I'm going to lose my mind and pull don't make me smack you or something like that, and say you're a parent that doesn't practice that, right? Which I don't think parents, that's just me. If you say that because the threat is so big, that it makes their behavior change.
It has to be a big consequence.
Big consequence. Don't make me get a trash bag and throw all this stuff away. They're treating it like trash.
Yeah.
You're not actually going to do that.
Don't make me stone you. Don't make me stone you.
Yeah. And so there's a spirit and letter of the law. We see this in Jesus himself when they brought the woman. We've talked about this in previous videos twice now. The woman caught in adultery, they want to stone her to death. And Jesus shows a different way. Why? Because the laws show us that we're a sinner and need somebody outside of ourselves to either grant us clemency or punishment. Punishment if we're being obstinate. If you're being obstinate, you deserve the punishment. But if you're repentant, you need forgiveness. So this is one of the things I think Adams kind of misses out on is the spirit in the letter. He's following it to the letter, and when he tries to, he ends up getting into an altercation with a guy at a park.
Who randomly happened to be an adulterer. I mean, the kismet.
Mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so when I got to that part, I was like, oh, dang, I wonder what he's going to do now. To which he admits later on in the book that it's impossible.
Yeah.
It's impossible to live perfectly, and he admits his own fault here. But when I think about the face mask thing, okay, spirit and letter, right? I will wear a mask where they ask me to, because I want to share and love for my fellow citizens. And I want them to know that whether it's true, whether it's scientific, or whether it's just out of fear, I'm going to respect you. I'm going to respect you. And so I'll follow the letter. But, and maybe this is wrong to admit out loud, but I'm not going to wear it in the car. I'm not going to wear it when I'm talking to my kids. I'm not going to wear it when I'm showering. You know what I mean? That's too far. When you carry the letter that far, I'm not going to kiss my wife goodnight with one on. It's too far.
I got to jump in because it's crazy how you just did that, where you're trying to take it and make it like we need to understand the spirit of what is being delivered.
Yep.
And that is maybe where the disrespect is coming in, the spirit that it's, do I have this? This is
you do.
Pretty awesome the way you're explaining it. Keep going.
Yeah. And I think when you don't follow the spirit of it, you become mean-spirited. And that's when people become combative. I know that the purpose of, there's three types of law in the Bible. There's the civil law, and there's the ceremonial law, and there's the moral law. The civil law, and God gave that to them so that when other nations looked at Israel, they would go, that's kind of different. Why? So they followed the law to show that they're a distinct people. And the question is why? Well, because we have a relationship with God that forms our society and all these kinds of things. We don't have to follow the civil law, that portion of the Bible, because we're not Israel. You know what I mean? We're America. And so to make the false move of trying to make the civil laws of the Bible the laws of America is to make the false move of trying to make America not America, to make America Israel. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That would be not the purpose for which the Bible gave it. Now, there's ceremonial laws, like not cutting your beard on the corner, right? And wearing tassels and all these things, which he does a very good job. I mean, he wears a white robe. He looks like, I think he said in the book that he had never been patted down so much at the airport.
Yes.
Because the guy did look a little Al Jazeera, and so it was really,
yeah.
And
but
so
then he also goes to the other extreme too, where he's like, analyzing the lies that he tells his son, who I think is like 3 or something like that at the time. And, he gives the story about, the kid wants a bagel, and he goes in the fridge and he's like, there are no bagels. We get English muffins. So he goes to his wife. He's like, we don't have any bagels. Where are the bagels? She's like, we don't have any. Give him an English muffin. He'll never know the difference. Tell him it's a bagel. And so he's having this conundrum. And so he goes back and the son's like, is this a bagel? And he's like, well, no, it's not a bagel, but it's just as good. And the kid throws a tantrum. Now, he's, and it's, I see how the spirit of the message is so important. And maybe that's what people are missing. The spirit of the message. So how about some of that?
Yeah. I think that it's important to see the reason for which God gave these things was not to turn us into a bunch of jerks, to like stone people, but also at the same time, God knows something about us in that we're going to do whatever it takes for our own best interests, even against, we'll even lie to our children. You know what I mean? Because we don't want to have to deal with the disappointment and the tantrum that's going to follow. And so God is giving us in the Bible a way to live in between our something that helps us to live past our own sinful inclinations, but at the same time to protect us at the same time. And I think he does a really good job of this in there when he talks about the thing that switched for him is that he had to he learned the positive benefits of giving thanks.
Yes.
So yeah, yes.
Yes.
So he's praying, right? He's praying and he's an agnostic. This is what's wild. As an agnostic, he's praying. And so he doesn't believe what he's doing, but he's doing it anyways because he's
Right.
trying to write this book. And as he's praying, he's giving thanks a lot. He's just giving thanks for this and that. And he realized that in the process of him just going through the behavior of giving thanks, he became more thankful. You see, what he couldn't help but to be affected by is the spirit of the word. What I mean by that is this. People usually say, change your mind so you can change your behavior. And in the field of psychology, that's called cognitive dissonance, right? What you're supposed to do is change your behavior, and then it'll affect your mind. And so what he started to do was to give thanks, and it made him less of a bitter person. And he then was actually able to see how thankful he could be. The spirit of the word affected him. And scientists have figured this out. Here's what they say. Scientists say, if you smile more, you'll be happy. Which we think the opposite. We think, be happy so you could smile more.
So on that point, if you've ever watched it, Amy Cuddy has an amazing TED Talk called Fake It Till You Make It. And what she did in that was she described the science behind the idea, kind of in the same way tested this idea of, can an outward change or a change that is, superficial change, such as in your example, going through the motions of change of praying, whether or not you believe in God, just doing the motions of praying in realizing that there's an effect. And she found scientifically that, like what you just said, and I think that that's the same statistic that Amy Cuddy quotes, is that they found scientifically that if you smile, you will become happy. So we're able to alter our spiritual plane by affecting the physical plane and doing things such as, to bounce it back to you, prayer.
Yeah.
Right?
That's exactly correct.
Literally trigger something in the matrix.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Glitch. Here's what I like about, so let's go back to spirit. Everything you just said is awesome, and I like it. I want to go back to the adultery conversation in spirit and letter. So when you read the letter and it says, if you commit adultery, everybody's going to pick up stones in your community and throw them at you until you're dead. It makes you go, I love my wife more than I love this, fleeting glance or whatever, or this urge. And so reading the letter causes a change in your spirit. So you don't commit adultery, see your behavior. And then over time, you realize you really do love your wife. And, she really is amazing for you. And it changes your thinking about her. What an incredible woman that, even though I'm a sleazeball and I'm looking at all these ladies, that because the Bible has said, don't do it, and I believe the Bible and I want to live according to it, it's changed my mind about her. And here's the most beautiful woman in the world. And sure, you may disagree, but I think you're insane because God has given me a gift to my wife. Spirit in the letter. The letter kills, the spirit makes alive. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
And so the letter tells you to behave a certain way, and you can't do it, and you struggle under it. Therefore, the Holy Spirit comes in and transforms your mind, and you live.
Yeah.
That was really complicated.
Yeah. No, I get it, and I'm actually just rewinding in my head because when you're talking, I'm in chapter 4. I haven't finished the book yet, but he did just get to some of that, and actually in chapter 4, I think just this morning, I believe that that he does say in there, after or near excuse me, the time that he starts talking about the fact that it isn't outside of the of the realm of being able to achieve that kind of belief, but that it's impossible to live this way in all of its entirety, and therefore in that one comment completely admits that the Bible really, and this is what he says, his rabbi says, is the Bible really is there. Not, he goes, when are you going to stop looking at it as a self-help book? And when you're going to realize that it's not there for that reason, it's there to help you realize that you are mortal and that you are full of sin, and that there's all of these different ways in the Bible that that he's telling you that you're not there, you're not even close.
Yeah, yeah.
And that kind of viewpoint was really eye-opening for me.
Yeah. I really appreciate you bringing that up, because I think at that moment he was closest to believing in a God, because
Yes.
when he realizes that the whole point of the Bible is to humble you before your God, and then for you to be thankful that you can live in relationship with him, would be the conclusion, right? Which he doesn't grasp at this point. I mean, I'm sure he will, especially with rented sheep in the middle of Times Square.
Yeah.
And so he realizes that the whole point of the Bible is to humble us. And I think this can be a profound lesson that he teaches us, is that there were certain parts of the Bible that were impossible for him, and in fact offensive to him and offensive to the people around him. And I think, honestly, if you are reading the Bible, if you're honest about saying that you read the Bible, it will offend you. If you read the Bible and you're not offended, you are not yet reading it correctly. Sure. And I'm not saying it's because God's a jerk. It's just that you have to realize that it's impossible. And that's the offense. We're always trying to justify ourselves.
Yes.
And so the only thing after the logical conclusion after reading the Bible is there's a God, and then here's his mercy, that even though he knows that we're all messed up, and even though he knows that he gave this whole book and we can't live it, that he in his mercy still says, you are my child, I love you, I accept you on account of Christ. And I think that that's huge. His conclusion, though, as the author, I think, is that he said he learned to live with reverence. And I thought that was very profound, because he said, I'm an agnostic, and I learned about sacred space. That's the word that he used. I learned about sacred space. He says, I learned that taking a Sabbath was important, because he was able to admit, I'm a workaholic.
Yeah.
And so he learned to make things sacred again, even though he could admit that he still struggled with belief. And I think that that's huge. So the book's not going to turn you into like a card-carrying Baptist or something like that.
No.
But it is a very good book about kind of just digesting the Bible at its nuts and its bolts level.
So he says something else in chapter 4 that I heard this morning, and I don't think it was him saying it. If I recall correctly, it was one of his advisors. And just for anybody that's listening that hasn't read the book, we've talked mainly of the Jewish aspects of it, but he actually makes reference in the very beginning that he has all sorts of consultants, if you will, or experts that, and many are Christian. It spans the whole thing. So when he's bouncing one of these ideas around, it's going through a lot of interpretation of these people before it comes out. So I don't want anybody to feel misled, like, this is a plainly Jewish context. It's not at all. And now I lost what I was going to say.
It was something that one of these.
He said that it was one of his consultants. He said that the Bible, what it really ultimately shows us is that we should be servants of God. That is what our purpose here is to be his servant. Now, just as a side note, I know we've only touched upon it. We don't need to touch upon it now, but this also plays into my theory of purgatory that I've shared with you.
Oh, yeah.
Because I do believe that we are here. I mean, I say it the wrong way, and you've corrected me, and I still can't remember how to say it right. But I do believe we're being tested here. I do believe that if we weren't, we wouldn't be given this list of rules and have all this yin and yang on the planet between bad and good. It would just be a good place, in which a lot of people, like agnostics, that they don't understand. So they look at things like it's black and white. If there's a God, why is there suffering? Well, that's the whole point. And people believe that if there was a God, then we would be in heaven. Well, that's not necessarily how I think this goes here. And comments like that, where here's an agnostic who says, and he's at least quoting it, whether he said it or whether one of his consultants said it, he's saying that the general purpose of the Bible is not to be, how do I better my, like, how do I self-help book style, like, how do I become this, or how do I keep, like he says, how do I keep my kids from being a charlatan, or like
Yeah.
he said, it's less of that and more of realizing our faults, realizing that we're not perfect and we are not God,
Yeah.
and therefore being his servants in his servitude by understanding the Spirit in the Word, and be
Yeah.
able to apply that to today's times, which is kind of what we're trying to do
Yeah.
here, and make it something that's actually livable and understandable for people to use.
Yeah. 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 And that was very well said. I have no way of kind of commenting on that. I'm just going to say, yeah, that. Um, what I think is really great is that in his endeavor to live biblically, he realized how impossible it is, how he had to pick and choose. He couldn't even do it. There's some really comedic moments in there.
Oh yeah,
Um,
lots.
and I think that he was in touch with, how the Spirit was forming him. But I think one thing that is missing is the best Jewish interpreter of the Bible and how to live it and understand it is Jesus Christ. Because Jesus is Jewish,
Right.
that was on purpose, and he's the only one who lived biblically. But if you look at his actions, you'll see that rather than be strict with the letter of the law, he chose something else that's present in the Bible, which we call gospel, which is good news. He chose to forgive where he could have killed. Let's use an Old Testament example, New Testament example. Old Testament example, David was an adulterer. Nathan the prophet knew this. Nathan the prophet could have walked into David's throne room with full right and full privilege and executed him. He could have. But what Nathan does is he brings David into an admission of his own fault and then forgives him. And that was so powerful and profound that it changed David's life. In fact, it spared his life. You're going to see that happen again in the person of Jesus, who, when faced with the same opportunity, chose to forgive. Why? Because they're trying to be soft? No, because the Bible has two teachings. It has the teaching of law and has the teaching of what we call gospel. And the law shows us our sin. It's like a mirror. Like we wake up after a rough weekend and we look in the mirror and we're just like, ugh, that's me. It's bad. And you got to start living better. Or the law can also be considered like a curb. It's like what keeps you off the sidewalk and hitting pedestrians. You know what I mean? The law prevents you from harming another person, even though you could, and you have the full capability of doing it. But also the law is like a guide. If I want to know God's way, I can look it up. And by the way, he does a really good job in the book of saying if you're gonna live biblically, you're gonna look irrational. And he does. There's some great photos in the book of him looking perfectly irrational, because you're living according to somebody else's plan. Now that's the law, but the Bible also contains this other teaching called the gospel, or the good news. And the good news is this, that not on account of us or on account of our effort, but on account of God's attitude towards us, he has not held our behaviors against us. He has not he's not even laid their final punishment at our door. Instead, he's put all of our punishment, and he's put all of our transgressions of his law and all of our awfulness, he's put that all on somebody else who's paid that on our behalf. And that is completely scandalous, because all I want to do is try to get right with God. And finally, he says, you can't do it. I got to do it for you. You go, no, let me try. And he goes, no. And he goes, no, let me try. And he says, you just can't. And he does it for us. And it's really completely profound and life-changing. And that's what the gospel is. The Bible contains both. Both the Old Testament and the New Testament contain both of these kinds of teachings. You have Jesus saying some pretty rugged things. It's all law. He says, if you call your brother a dumbass, you're liable to be, to hell. I mean, that's pretty intense, right? Because all I do is call my siblings dumbasses, right? But at the same time, he says, forgive your brother. And Peter says, how many times? Like 7 times? And he's like, no, like a bazillion, gajillion times. Just, just don't stop. And so the Bible's full of these two teachings, law and gospel. And they live in tension to each other. And the law should drive me to humbleness. It should drive me to humility and to realize I need help. I need God to set me straight. And the gospel is how God sets us straight. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to me it does. To the audience, if you have questions, put them in the comments below, and we'll take a look at them. And Pastor Bob will give some conjecture on them, and maybe I will too.
Yeah, you will.
So
thanks for watching today. It's been a great conversation. We'd love for you to be a part of the conversation, so go ahead and click subscribe. And if you hit the notification bar, it'll let you know when new videos are coming out, which is really important because all of our videos are about new and current events that are happening. If you have any questions, go ahead and contact me via email. It's great to have you a part of the conversation. Thanks for joining us. Bye.